So welcome. Welcome to this session about to continue regarding Martin Luther's perspective and advice into mental illness. I'm Stephen Saunders. I'm from Marquette University up in Milwaukee. I'm a professor of psychology. I am a Lutheran Missouri Synod member. My church is in Greenfield, Wisconsin, our Father's Lutheran Church. And talking about going to the Catholic high school here in St. Louis, I think confused some people. So the objectives of the talk are to show that Luther advised many persons with mental health struggles, mental illness, mental health problems, so that his conceptualization and his advice are astonishingly similar to the advice that modern mental health professionals are trained to dispense and do dispense, and to show how his advice can be applied today by pastors and lay persons. Those are the objectives. As with the first talk, these slides will be made available. So I don't mind you taking notes. It reminds me of Marquette. If you really want to make me think of being in front of students at Marquette, if 2 or 3 of you could fall asleep, that would be but here we go. So spiritual consolation was part and parcel of Martin Luther's life. I think it is part and parcel of really any pastor's life, perhaps especially today. But I'm of the opinion that Luther in particular was sought out. People referred others to him when they realized that they had depression or melancholia, because he was so compassionate and because he gave such really solid advice, which never strayed a hair from his theology. We have thousands of his letters. I like to think that Luther got many, many letters. He responded to many, many of them. He didn't keep the letters he received, but anyone who got a letter from Luther, as would you have, kept it. And so we have thousands of his letters. Theodore Tappert, I think first in 1953, came up with a translation of letters specifically consoling or providing consolation to individuals with a variety of problems, grief, doubt, but also emotional distress. And this is a copy of his book, or rather a version of the copy of Luther's Letters of Spiritual Counsel. It actually can be found online for free as well. So I recommend that. A lot of this talk, the previous talk, are based on that. The outline of this talk we'll review quickly. Medieval, and I put medicine in quotes because it really wasn't what we think of as medicine, but they did what they thought they should do. Luther's personal experience with so-called medieval medicine, and also his personal experience with mental health issues. Review that. Review the insight that I believe Luther gained from his own experiences, but also just being a very, very insightful, very, very smart about human nature, both from his experiences and his experiences in talking with others. Talk about his advice about thinking and behavior in particular, and how you can apply his advice if you should choose to do so. So Luther, died in the Renaissance. The Renaissance followed the medieval period, approximately 14th century. The Renaissance was approximately 14th century through 16th century, called the Renaissance because it was the so-called rediscovery of many of the lost writings. After the fall of the Roman Empire, a lot of the writings of the Greek scientists and some of the Roman scientists and the the physicians and the philosophers got lost. They were preserved, but to Europe, when Europe went into, again, the reason that the medieval period is sometimes called the Dark Ages, which is an exaggeration, but the reason it's called that is because these works were lost. And so they were brought back and really impelled, historical researchers think that really did impel the foundation of scientific practices, universities, philosophical philosophies, and even some theologies. So theological studies, hence we call it the Renaissance, because we were bringing back architecture, literature, art, of course, bringing back so much that had been maybe not lost, but a lot less common than prior. So this is Luther's era. So the Renaissance, again, in quotes, rediscovered the works of, not the words, but the works of Hippocrates, perhaps in particular with regard to medicine, And Hippocrates had his humoral theory about illness. This theory being that there are 4 essences or fluids, literally fluids. Humors was the term for fluids or moisture or liquid. So it was his humoral theory, which is that there are 4 humors: black bile, in Greece melancholia, yellow bile, in Greek cholera, blood, in Greek sanguinis, and phlegma in the Greek language. These 4 humors must be in balance for someone to maintain health. Or when someone becomes ill, it's because these humors have become out of balance. Of particular concern, so what that meant, an imbalance means, well, if you're going to treat someone for this illness that they have, you're going to try to rebalance those humors to bring them back into health. So it's an imbalance of the 2 biles and the blood and the phlegm. And by the way, too much blood in particular, I think it's because blood is the easiest thing to access of the 4 humors. But too much blood in particular was a common so-called cause of health problems. And so the practice of bloodletting. Too much blood, well, there's an easy treatment. Cause leads to treatment. Always has, always, today still does. If we think that mental illness has a biological cause, we will try to treat that biological cause with medications, for example. But if there's too much blood, take some of the blood away, take some of the blood out of the body, but there's also purgatives. Purgatives cause people to have to go to the bathroom. Emetics, similar, have force people or get them to go to the bathroom again to get rid of some of these fluids in their body and get the fluids ideally back into balance. So this was really medieval medicine, sort of in a nutshell. What about Luther's personal experiences with medicine and mental health? Well, Luther endured a lot of these humoral-based treatments. The physics, and this was the term then, where we get the term physician, if you've ever wondered about that. Well, physicians don't really do physics. The physics scientists do physics. Well, physics was the term for medicine, so physician, we get that from that. But he said the physics, when he was sick, the physics treated me as if I were a great bull. They filled him with purgatives and emetics. And again, I think it's probably highly likely that given how many illnesses Luther had, that he probably did undergo some bloodletting as well. But Luther did not automatically turn to Hippocrates. And 500 years later, after Hippocrates, Claudius Galen, who worked in the Roman Empire, formalized this humoral theory, and meaning he said, this in particular is in excess, causing this illness, that in particular. So he formalized it and formalized treatments based on the humoral theory. So that's Galen. But Luther didn't automatically credit or turn to Hippocrates and Galen with regard to mental health. He knew from his own experiences, which we're going to review, that mental health problems were typically not due to physiology. So the humoral treatments were physiological. Take away some of the blood, make the person drink this potion, fill them up with this liquid. And that was the treatment for the physiology of these medical illnesses. Luther wasn't having anything to do with that. He recognized that mental health problems, and again, I think from his own personal experience, recognized that they were due to stress, they were due to thinking, and they were due to an individual's behavior. He himself had emotional struggles, emotional turmoil. He acknowledged this, he admitted this in his letters, and all of the quotes that follow are from his letters. Some of them are from his talks at table, when he gathered a group of friends and they would talk about things, theological issues, and so forth. So he said, he wrote in one of his letters to someone experiencing depression about his own experience with depression. He wrote, "When I first entered the monastery, it came to pass that I was sad and downcast. I could not lay aside my melancholy." Said to someone else, "I myself have spent a good part of my life in sorrow and gloom." By the way, I don't think it's very likely that a lot of his emotional turmoil was because of his physical maladies, which were so many. All of his maladies had the commonality of causing pain. He was really in constant pain, and that probably accounts for a lot of his emotional turmoil. But he himself attributed his emotional turmoil, his experience with depression in particular, to the way he thought and to his behavior. Again, when I first entered the monastery, it came to pass that I was sad and downcast. His good friend, I'm blocking on his name. No. The Staupitz. The Vicar General Johannes Staupitz was his supervisor at the monastery. They became good friends. Staupitz recognized some brilliance in Luther. And according to Luther, who adored Staupitz, said, "When I opened up to Staupitz, what horrible and terrible thoughts I had. This is the way in which Staupitz comforted me. Don't be stupid." Not quite. But he said, "Why do you trouble yourself with these speculations of yours?" Speculations. You're having these thoughts, but what makes you think that they're anything more than speculation? They're foolish. Why trouble yourself with your foolish thoughts? What about Luther's behavior in his mental health? So Luther himself said, my thoughts were distressing me. Luther also later, in a different letter, attributed his own behavior to his mental health problems. What he wrote made the Pope awfully angry. The Pope said, "Anyone, kill him on sight, and you'll be doing the church a favor." So, of course, to protect him from the Pope, Luther was secreted away and isolated at the fortress at Wartburg. Over time, Luther admits this. He admits this in a letter to someone with depression. He said, "Over time, he isolated himself from others at the fortress and subsequently succumbed to depression." He wrote Philip Melanchthon, "Instead of being ardent in spirit," actually he wrote this from Wartburg, "instead of being ardent in spirit, I am the prey of sinful appetites, laziness, and love of sleep. For 8 days I have neither prayed nor studied through fleshly temptations." he realized that especially isolating himself from the other folks at the fortress, this caused him to go into depression. He wrote later to a young man in depression. He said, "Solitude and melancholy are poisonous and fatal to all people, and especially to a young man." He was speaking from experience. And to another young man, "No one realizes how much harm it does a young person to avoid pleasure and cultivate solitude and sadness like I did when I was at the fortress at Wartburg." He was speaking from personal experience. He had thoroughly modern insight. Luther understood that thinking and behavior affect emotional functioning, how people are doing emotionally. This is thinking. What's another word for thinking? Cognitions. Behavior, actions. Perhaps you've heard of cognitive behavior therapy. It is the most well-known, it is the most widely practiced therapy by modern mental health professionals since about the 1970s, when it really took hold. It took hold because it has been proven time and time and time again to be of greatest help, of profound help to persons with depression and anxiety. Surprisingly, also to persons with schizophrenia, also to persons with the substance use disorders, with the eating disorders. The way we think and the way we behave, Luther recognized this 500 years ago. The way we think, the way we behave affects our emotional functioning. His advice that he dispensed is amazingly consistent with modern methods. Again, mental health professionals, we use strategies to help people change their behavior and to change the way they think. This is our mental or our psychological life. These things happen within the person. We have our thoughts, we have our feelings, and of course, our minds direct our behavior. If you have plans for going out tonight, eventually you will go out with someone, maybe to a restaurant. Those plans are thoughts. Those plans are in your mind, and your behavior follows the dictates of your mind. This is obvious. These things happen within the person. Emotions, of course, are the way we feel. Presently and over the long term, we call present emotion, we call that affect. Long-term emotion, we call that mood. Depression is a, quote, mood disorder, sometimes also called an affective disorder. But mental health professionals tend to say affect is moment to moment, mood is long-term. Affect typically goes up and down moment to moment. Sometimes depression is called an affective disorder because the affect doesn't go up and down. Earlier you were bored, earlier you saw a friend and you were happy. Later you heard some sad news and that made you sort of sad. And your affect goes up and down throughout the day. Not too down, not too up. But if your affect is, for some reason, just consistently low, that's an affective disorder. So emotions, presently and over the long term. Behavior is what we do. It's how we act. It's how we behave, of course. Thinking entails any mental activity. You can think about your thinking. We spend a lot of time thinking about our past. Right? We have terms for that. Right? You're reliving the past. Why do you keep focusing on the, you're obsessed with what happened? Yes. These are all thoughts. Memories are simply somehow laid down in our brains, and we can think about our memories. And of course, post-traumatic stress disorder is where something terrible that has happened in the past keeps being relived in the present because of perhaps faulty thinking because we can't stop thinking about it. Their expectations. I like to say the mind is timeless because we often think of thinking as happening right now. Well, thinking, as I just said, there's so much thinking that goes on about our past. There's, people also who all they do is think about the future. They plan, they anticipate. So thinking is perhaps the most relevant thing that people do with regard to their emotional health. Thinking, behavior, emotions influence each other. Thinking especially is important to emotions and behaviors. So I put these arrows here. The way we think affects how we feel and what we do, but also what we do affects how we think and how we feel. And if you've ever felt really bad, had the flu and just felt lousy, your thinking was influenced, your behavior was influenced, so they really do influence each other. Or for the mental health professional who is focused on helping someone with depression or anxiety, with this overriding mood of anxiety, this overriding constant mood of sadness, we know that thinking and behavior, Luther knew 400 years prior that thinking and behavior affect how people feel. The way we think, the way we feel, what we do affects our external life as well. I call it our roles and our relationships. How we think, what we do, how we feel affects how well we do in our roles, our relationships. Our relationships with others is probably the most essential aspect of yourself. If someone asks you about yourself, you're going to probably talk. Maybe first you'll say, well, I'm a professor, I'm a teacher, I'm a deaconess. But how you really talk about yourself, what you talk with those who already know what you do, what you talk about yourself with regard to those who are most beloved to you is about your relationships, your spouse, concerns about your spouse, your children, your friends, your parents, your grandparents, your grandchildren. So relationships are impaired potentially by problematic thinking, which leads to problematic emotions and problematic behavior. Or being overwhelmed by negative emotions causes negative thinking. Again, these are double arrows, they influence each other. So if you're wondering, I do sort of agree that emotions, really sad depression mood, serious depression is biological. And thus, the depression itself, it's not because of the thinking and the behavior, but it causes negative thinking, negative behavior. So again, they really are, they influence each other deeply, and they deeply influence how well we do in relationships. Also, how we do in our roles. Roles and relationships overlap. I have a relationship with my wife, Ruth, but I have a role as her husband. I have a relationship with my children, my grandchildren, but I also have a role as parents. And mental illness, the way people think, the way people feel, the way people behave, can negatively affect roles and relationships. And you've heard the term dysfunction or impairment. This defines problems fulfilling our roles, or problems meeting our obligations, or problems in our relationships. So how do we define mental illness? We combine our internal and how our internal world affects our external world. And this is not my definition, this is right out of the manual, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, for those of you who know that acronym. Mental illness is defined in the DSM as a person basically feels badly and or is not in control of his actions and or thinks unrealistically and or any combination of those three, including all three. And as a result, the person experiences a lot of distress and or fails in obligations to others, fails in roles, or has impaired relationships. This is how we define, this is literally the definition of mental illness. How can you, maybe a simple way to remember this, something I offer to people as a way to remember, it's not just the one, but it's the one causing impairment in one or both of the others. The way that I encourage people to remember this is sometimes I'm asked, when does a person have a drinking problem? Well, when your behavior of drinking, the action of drinking is causing problems, you have a drinking problem. It's not how much you drink. It's not how frequently you drink. It's if the drinking is causing a problem, then it meets criteria for mental illness. What about the prevalence of mental illness? Well, you know many people with mental illness. And by the way, they are suffering. The rate of mental illness is 1 in 5 persons in any given year, 1 in 6 persons right now. So in a church with 500 members, right now there's 100 people, 80 or 100 people with the mental illness. Church with only 100, there's 20. So you know lots of persons with mental illness. You just maybe don't know who they are. Church of 500, about 40% will experience a mental illness at some point in their lifetime. Again, you know people, just might not know who they are. And we ought wonder about that. The Lutheran Witness, you might be aware, the most recent edition, it is about mental illness. And one of the articles in there talks about, you know them, but you don't know who they are. You probably know in your church from the prayers who's experienced physical health problems, cancer maybe, in the hospital. You know those who are dying. You might not know those who are experiencing mental health problems, although they're probably much more prevalent. Why is that? Well, that's because of the intense stigma around mental illness. So there are Lutheran Witness copies in the back. If you don't have it already, I encourage you to pick it up. It's a fine volume, and one of the articles in there does talk about stigma. So Luther had this insight about behavior and thinking. And we can use Luther's advice that he gave based on his insight, based on his own experiences about thinking and behavior. By the way, persons with mental health problems, they don't always, but if they do finally decide to seek help, it will be from their church. Research shows that they will seek out help from their church, where you can meet them, where pastors can meet them and see them. And of course they go to their church. And the church can either help them or hurt them. Taking a stigmatizing attitude will hurt them and will drive them away from the church. So it will hurt them eternally, or we can help them. We can help them by doing what Luther did. First thing Luther did was he saw them. He wasn't afraid to see that they were there. Luther helped by welcoming them, as we'll see from his letters. He helped by talking with them, by encouraging them, by consoling them. He helped by referring those in need of psychological help where he could. Much more limited 500 years ago than we have now, and you can help by consoling. You can do that, by the way. You can help by referring those who need referral, or you can help by consoling as best you can. There's a long letter Luther wrote exemplifying his advice, and I want to read it to you. His letter was to Jonas von Stockhausen. This is not him. I couldn't find a picture of him, but it's close enough. I'm pretty sure he looked just like that. Jonas von Stockhausen was captain of mounted knights. He was basically the cop at this at Nordhausen. He and his men, mounted knights. Stress and health problems. Luther learned that he was having a lot of stress and some health problems, and Luther learned he was becoming depressed and suicidal. And Luther wrote him in 1532. Good friends have informed me that the evil one is tempting you severely with weariness of life and longing for death. Luther addressed his thinking. My dear friend, it is high time that you cease relying on and pursuing your own thoughts. Listen to other people, like I did with stoutness. Listen to other people. Give the closest attention to what we say. Let our words penetrate to your thought. Resist your thoughts sternly and either suffer them. If you can't get rid of them, go ahead and let them bother you, but don't listen to them. Or eradicate them with force. He uses a lot of force, as you'll see, because Stockhausen was used to using force. He was a strong, healthy man. He reminded him of the theology of the cross. He reminded Stockhausen of that in this same letter. This is all from one long letter. Our Lord Christ also found life to be unpleasant and burdensome, yet he was unwilling to die unless it was his Father's will. He fled from death, held on to life as long as he could, and said, my time is not yet come. Elijah, Jonah, and other prophets likewise found life unendurable, and they nonetheless endured it. He advised, and I love this piece of his advice because it's not used often enough, but I use it all the time. I say to people, this depression is trying to kill you. Explicitly trying to say to them, it is not you. It is something that has taken hold of you and it's trying to kill you and you need to fight it. And Luther used, I didn't get it from Luther, but I was so pleased to see Luther say the same thing. Imagine with your depression that you are held fast and bound by chains and that you must work and sweat yourself out of their strangleholds by powerful exertions. Impose these demands on yourself, fight against yourself in this way, and God will assuredly help you. This is not you. This is something that has been forced on you, foisted on you. Remember who you are. Remember that you're inside there and fight against this. I love that advice. He advised distraction and behavior change. The best counsel of all, do not struggle against your thoughts at all, but ignore them. Act as if you were not conscious of them. Think of something else. That's modern psychological advice. Think of something else. Sometimes I tell people, set a timer, give yourself 5 minutes to think about this thing that's bothering you and only this thing that's bothering you. And when the timer goes off, stop thinking about it and think about other things. They say, well, devil, do not trouble me. I have no time for your thoughts. I must eat, drink, ride, go, or do this or that. Great advice. Behavioral change. Stop brooding. Stop isolating. Undertake to do anything else that you're able, whether play or something else, just so that you free yourself from these thoughts. So you stop thinking about these thoughts. Look what Luther is doing. He's saying, think about your thinking. Just so that you free yourself from these thoughts, hold them in contempt and dismiss them. And Luther Usually he started his letters with the following. To Stockhausen, he ended his letter with the following. Reminded him of his catechism. Reminded him, look, you know what the Lord wants. You know Christ died for your sins. Herewith I command you I commit you to the keeping of our dear Lord, the only Savior and real conqueror, Jesus Christ. He will keep his victory and triumph over the devil in your heart. May he cause all of us to rejoice in the help he gives you and the miracle he performs in you. Notice also the confidence that Luther, the hope that Luther is sharing. So important. We confidently hope and pray for this in accordance with his command and promise to us. So how to help someone? Do what Luther did. In this letter, in reverse order, remind someone in distress of the theology of the cross. Remind or advise healthy behavior and address negative thinking. Incorrect thinking. It's negative, but it's also incorrect. In my career, I think I've perhaps treated 1,000 different people with depression, and every one of them had the same thought. There's something wrong with me. I don't know why people like me. That's not a correct thought. It's a negative thought. So I put up the word negative thinking because their thinking is negative. Fortunately, it's also wrong. It would be impolite and actually improper to say to someone, the way you feel is wrong. But knowing that the way people feel is because of how they think, we can say to them, I can see you feel depressed, but I can't agree with you saying to yourself that you're not lovable. I can't agree with that thinking. And how do you explain your husband and those 4 kids? I had a woman say to me, I think she was pregnant and had 3 kids. I don't think my husband is sexually attracted to me. I burst out laughing. This is pretty sure he is. But she genuinely had that thought. And don't laugh at people. I can. But you should not laugh at someone. But you know, again, we don't make fun of how someone is feeling, or we don't say that your feeling is wrong, but we do say what you're thinking is wrong. Just a brief pause here. Thinking and feeling are so closely related. I invite you to pay attention just for the rest of the day, maybe, because you'll hear it. How often people say, I feel, when actually what they mean is, I think. I feel like she doesn't like me. You think she doesn't like you, and that makes you feel upset. I feel like this politician, I feel like this movement, I feel like you're wrong. No, you think I'm wrong. You think this way about this politician or about this law, and you don't like it. But they're so closely related. When someone says, again, they say to you, I feel like she doesn't like me. You know how they are feeling. Just by what she said or he said about what he's thinking. They're so closely related. And you'll hear people use the word feel when technically, not even technically, when in actuality, they should use the word thinking. We don't argue about how people feel. We don't tell people they feel wrong. But we have this huge opening, and Luther used it. We have this huge opening insight that the way you feel is because of how you're thinking. Let's talk about how you're thinking, causing you to feel this way, because your thinking is negative and is likely wrong. Not all thinking is wrong, of course. So in order, we remind them of the theology of the cross, remind them of Christ died for our sins, advise healthy behavior, and address negative, incorrect thinking. First, assure them of God's love. Assure them that health problems are not due to weak faith. Persons with mental illness in particular are vulnerable to this oft-taught belief taught by theologians of glory since Christ ascended into heaven. which is that the assurance of your salvation should make you always and forever happy. That's not true. And a person with mental health problems, severe mental illness, depression, anxiety, hears this and they feel doubly bad about themselves. Assure them that their faith given them is given by God. Third article. We do not believe of our own accord. We believe because of the gift of the Holy Spirit. Christians will experience doubt. Infecting is what Luther called it. We're constantly assaulted by doubt. We feel guilty about being a sinner. We feel joy at our salvation, and yet they're both so hard to believe. They're both hard to believe. And so we're assaulted by doubt. And Luther said, of course you are. This is part of the Christian life. And so he began every letter of consolation with such catechetical reminders, including letters to his own wife, Katie. Katie was concerned. This is a week before Luther died, so she was right to be concerned. And he was traveling, the weather was bad, he wasn't healthy. And she said, I'm very, very worried about you. And he wrote back and said, foolish woman, and he teased her and said, by the way, is this how you've been catechized? Is this how you've been catechized? But he was very, very sweet in his letters. So he did both. Remember that God is in charge. Remember that. But also, don't worry about me. He gave the exact advice to those with depression, melancholy. I hear that the evil one is assailing you with melancholy, oh my dear woman. Do not let him terrify you. Christ also suffered all this, and so did many holy prophets and apostles, as the Psalter sufficiently shows. You're depressed. Don't mistake that for weak faith. You're depressed. Don't mistake that for weak faith any more than Moses, who talked directly to God, felt depressed and said to God, just kill me now. Abraham, who talked directly to God, said to his wife, I'm really scared of this guy. Don't tell him you're my wife. David, Peter, Paul, open your Bible, let it fall open to any page, and you will read about someone's experiencing mental health problems. So don't mistake that for weak faith. Said to another depressed person, excellent Jerome, you ought to rejoice in this temptation of the devil, because it's a certain sign that God is looking out for you and is merciful to you. Don't be ashamed of your depression. Watch for your behavior. He gave very modern advice about behavior. He counseled against being alone. No one realizes how much harm it does a young person to avoid pleasure and cultivate solitude and sadness. Mental health professionals call that socialization skills. If you don't know how to socialize, we can teach you. If you don't know how to have a conversation, we can teach you. Luther emphasized over and over and over again, do fun things. We call that behavioral activation. And it's the single most powerful intervention for depression that has ever been developed in the mental health field. He said, do anything you're able. This is Stockhouse. Play or something else, engage in writing and hunting, seek the company of others. Said, sometimes it's necessary to drink a little more, to play. Can you believe Luther said that? I know, I just shocked you. Sometimes it's necessary to drink a little more, play, jest, or even commit some sin in defiance and contempt of the devil. My pastor's never said that to me, but he doesn't have to, because Luther said it. Luther's very practical, very modern advice about thinking. He recognized an essential idea in 20th century mental health practice, which is what we think does not always reflect reality. We call them, in general, cognitive errors in thinking. Said to Stockhausen, don't allow yourself to dwell on these deadly thoughts. To do so is nothing short of yielding to the devil. Despise these thoughts. Don't ruminate about them. Think something else. Get yourself to distract yourself with something else. If that proves difficult, more advice about thinking. If that proves difficult, do something else. Think constantly of something else except this rumination about how anxious you are or how depressed you are. You can see, by the way, how that fits with the behavioral advice. Go be with people and do something fun, because that'll distract you from these negative thoughts. He advised against being alone, basically talking about magnification, the magnification of I did something wrong and I can never be forgiven magnification, an error in thinking, an upward social comparison. Why is my life so bad when everyone's so happy? Does that make you think of social media? Should. Increased rates of depression among adolescents, upward social comparison, Facebook, which I've always thought should be called Smile Book, because all you see on there is smiles, happy people with happy lunches, posting pictures of their sandwiches for some reason. When we're alone, don't be alone. When we're alone, the worst and saddest things come to mind. We leap to conclusions. We interpret everything in the worst light. Magnification in the worst possible way. We interpret what happened, magnifying the negative. Don't do that, said Luther. We imagine that other people are very happy, and it distresses us that things go well with them and evil with us. Everyone else is so happy. No, they're not. Which is why Luther put in so many letters. I went through something similar. I still go through these things, said Luther. He reminded friends that patriarchs, prophets, disciples found life unendurable, cried out for their own death, cursed the day they were born. That's addressing negative thinking. Personalization is what we call that, which is this is only happening to me. And Luther didn't use these terms, but these are the terms that cognitive therapists that we teach our students to use. And he said, talk to others. Refer others for therapy when they need it, when they're so depressed or anxious. Talking with another about your thoughts to see if they are accurate, as he did with Johannes Staupitz. Staupitz stayed with him. He shared his thoughts, and Staupitz said, why are you thinking about these speculations of yours? Do not dwell on your own thoughts. Listen to what other people have to say to you. Transpersonalize. This is not you. This thing that you're going through, think of it as something outside of you and fight it off. Imagine you're held fast and bound by chains and sweat yourself out of the stranglehold by powerful exertions. People have to fight their depression and not think of their depression as me. No, that's not you. That's something that you're inflicted with. Just like others are inflicted with cancer or with diabetes or with other physical illness. So how do we do this? Well, we're kind, we're understanding. Assume that someone talking to you about mental health problems might feel ashamed. It's probably a safe assumption. Address that shame, remind them of the theology of the cross. Address that shame, say, this is not due to faith. God is not displeased with you. You should come to church because you might not think you're likable, but you are likable. And we would like you, likable person, to come to church where we can like you. You don't have to use like that many times. Listen and determine their need. Some people will need to see a mental health professional. God gave us mental health professionals. Luther clearly said, go to a physician. You're not going to like what they're doing, but go to a physician. I hate what a physician does to me, but it's for my own good, right? So go to a professional as needed. This is pretty severe. Have you ever thought about talking to someone about this, or talking to a mental health professional? Be discerning. Encourage them to be discerning. Not all mental health professionals are created alike. There are good plumbers, there are bad plumbers. There are good car mechanics, there are bad car mechanics. If it's not working, say thank you very much and try someone else. If you don't feel comfortable with this person, find someone else, someone you do feel comfortable with. Give kind, directive advice about thinking and about behavior, as Luther did. So we apply by, we do refer, but we don't defer. Because we mental health professionals cannot give the person what the church can give. Don't refer them to a mental health professional who will talk to them about their faith. Simply don't. That's their pastor's job. That's their deaconess's job. Don't do that. Because chances are pretty good that the Lutheran they're seeing believes that women ought to be pastors, ought to be pastors, that the Lutheran they're seeing doesn't believe that every moment of our lives is spent in a state of sin. So don't send them to someone who will talk to them about their faith. Send them to someone who will refer them back to their pastor or their deaconess about their faith. As Luther did, provide direction by his discretion, be discerning about them. Don't mistake spiritual consolation with mental health care. Don't allow them, encourage them not to talk about their faith with their, talk to their mental health professional, say, I am a Lutheran. I believe that there is a God. I believe that Christ died for my sins. I believe that I am a sinner. And just so you know that. And that if the person has anything but respect for that, say, thanks very much, find someone else. Thank you very much. I went over time by about 6 or 7 minutes, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Yes.
I meet with a lot of people who have neurodegenerative disorders, and it's really hard for them. They can't just go out and do something else and they have negative thinking.
Correct.
Do you have any?
So neurodegenerative, such as dementia, such as Alzheimer's.
Like myasthenia gravis, ALS.
Yeah. The most important thing is probably the most important thing for human beings is socialization. Just, being with other people and, not being able to do much, that's tragic and that is depressing. But at least they can be in the room perhaps and enjoy company then. And, there's nothing to be ashamed about this. You should come out, and because it will be good for your mental health. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Okay. Yes, I am.
Since I've been to Wartburg Castle,
Mhm.
and back in the day when they did that stone, and there was wood rooms on top, and not to burn out all the wood, but they rebuilt it according to what it would look like. I've been in Luther's room, this space, it's been rebuilt. So you have a crummy bed, basically, a crummy little desk, and a big kind of furnace, which was like in the living room area that it showed on the picture. And a little window to look out over the forest, which is never been able to be developed because that's the forest you look at. So nobody can go in there.
Yeah,
That's a reason for being depressed. He can walk around a castle,
right.
but that's where he lived. So yeah, he had a good reason.
Yeah. And sort of similar to the previous question, he was very limited in what he could do. But he compounded it by isolating himself in his room.
That's a crummy little room.
I think, in a previous talk, I said, the Dark Ages, we don't call them, the Luther lived just past, just after the Dark Ages, but the Renaissance was still pretty dark. There's a lot to be depressed about: lack of sanitation, constant warfare, disease. How about the plague? Can you remember the plague? So yes, ma'am.
You said that you treat a lot of patients with depression as a psychologist.
Yes.
About how often do you refer them to a psychiatrist because they seem to need medication?
If it is severe, but it's often they come in and they are taking medications. And if they're not, and if the depression is interfering with their capacity to participate in therapy, if they're so depressed, then then I will refer them. But I also, but you refer as in practically insist, no, you gotta go see a psychiatrist. But otherwise, pretty common to ask if they've ever talked to a psychiatrist or seen a psychiatrist. There are a lot of people that simply don't want to take the medications and, you know, so that's, thank you for that question. Yes.
We only have 4 minutes till the next session starts.
Okay,
We
so
could,
we gotta
we
go.
could continue outside
Okay.
maybe, but we gotta get.
Thank you, sorry about that.